One of my favorite words is Shibboleth. It appears just a few times in the Hebrew Bible. In Psalm 69 and in Isaiah 27, it either translates to something like floodwaters or a channel of water. In other places, it can mean an ear of grain. Depends on context. But in the story of Jephthah the Gileadite, whose legacy we have explored the last couple of days, it is used in a very different context, having nothing whatever to do with its actual meaning, and all translations of the Bible simply transliterate the word. That is, they render the Hebrew into, in our case, English letters so that we can actually hear the word itself. And it's because in this case, it's not the meaning of the word that counts, but its pronunciation. Hello, I'm Stuart Baskin, pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Tyler, Texas, and this is your daily devotional for Saturday, August 5th, 2023. The story from Judges is pretty brief and a little confusing. The upshot of it is that when Jephthah the Gileadite went into battle against the Ammonites, one of the neighboring tribes, the Ephraimites, came to him afterward to complain that he'd not asked them to take part in the battle. Who knows, maybe they wanted to take part in the spoils. And their approach to Jephthah is not particularly friendly either. Why did you cross over to fight against the Ammonites and did not call us to go with you, they ask. We will burn down your house over you. There's no particular reason stated why the Ephraimites should be so upset, but whatever led to this act of aggression to Jephthah sparked a short and brutal battle between the Gileadites and the Ephraimites. That's the setup for what happens next. Now, the Jordan River ran between the Gileadites and the Ephraimites. The Gileadites defeated the Ephraimites, stranding many Ephraimite soldiers on the east side of the Jordan. The Gileadites, on their part, seized control of the fords across the Jordan River, meaning that any Ephraimites trying to return to their territory had to cross at points controlled by the Gileadites. This is where things get brutal. Here's how the book of Judges describes the action. Then the Gileadites took the fords of the Jordan against the Ephraimites. Whenever one of the fugitives of Ephraim said, "Let me go over," the men of Gilead would say to him, "Are you an Ephraimite?" When he said, "No," they said to him, "Then say Shibboleth." And he said, "Sibboleth," for he could not pronounce it right. Then they seized him and killed him at the fords of the Jordan. 42,000 of the Ephraimites fell at that time. Shibboleth, Sibboleth. The fate of the Ephraimite refugees hung on their ability to pronounce the word correctly. And apparently the Ephraimites could not pronounce the sound sh. It was a subtle but effective tell to determine who belonged to the tribe of Gilead and who belonged to the tribe of Ephraim. Now, quite aside from the sheer brutality of Jephthah and the Gileadite, the word shibboleth has come to mean anything by which we determine whether someone is an insider or an outsider. Most of the time it doesn't have life or death implications, but it does become a way that we determine who belongs to our tribe and who we should consider to be an outsider. And it can be anything, a word, a habit, anything. I remember reading a suspense novel years ago. Long since forgotten the story, let alone the author and title, but I do remember a scene in which an American spy was exposed by the way he ate a piece of pie. Like most Americans, he started at the pointy end, facing him, the end opposite the crust, and ate his way to the crust. But in the country where he was spying, people ate pie the other way. They put the crust in front of them and ate from crust to point. It cost the spy his life because the shibboleth, in this case, was the simple act of eating pie. And because he didn't eat it the way the natives of that country ate it, they were able to find him out. But a shibboleth can also provide a sense of assurance that a person is who she says she is. In an episode of The West Wing, the Bartlett administration confronts a tricky diplomatic issue. A group of Chinese refugees requests asylum in the United States, claiming to be Christians persecuted by the Chinese government. Knowing full well that people will lie to gain asylum, President Bartlett sits down with the leader of the group to determine whether or not they are truly Christians. He asks the man questions to try to determine whether his claim to be Christian is true or false. How do you practice the faith, he asks. Who is the head of the church? Can you name any of Jesus' disciples? When the man answers all of these things satisfactorily, he then says to Bartlett, Mr. President, Christianity is not demonstrated through a recitation of facts. You're seeking evidence of faith, a wholehearted acceptance of God's promise of a better world. Then he quotes Paul. For we know that man is justified by faith alone, is what St. Paul said. Justified by faith alone. Then he goes on to say, faith is the true, Shibboleth. Faith is the true Shibboleth. And with that, Bartlett knows for certain that the man's faith is sincere and his group's claim of asylum justified. We all have shibboleths we use to suss out who to trust and who to avoid, who's in and who's out, and many times we're not even aware we're using them. Most of the time, our shibboleths are pretty benign. But sometimes our shibboleths, like the one Jephthah's army used, are a way to divide rather than unite. So, pay attention to the shibboleths we commonly use. Sometimes they're helpful, but sometimes they serve only to discriminate unfairly and to divide us one from another. When we return next week, the generosity of Ephron the Hittite. But for now, may God continue to bless you and keep you in all that you do this day and in all the days ahead.